Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In Year in Gaming, we take a look back at the year 1991, the beginning of one of the most famous rivalries in gaming history, the console wars between Nintendo and Sega. The year was 1991, and a lot was happening. In the world, the Gulf War took place early in the year, while Soviet Union officially collapsed in December, marking the end of the Cold War era. At the box office, 1991 was stacked with blockbuster films including Terminator 2, Judgment Day, The Silence of the Lambs, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Hook, Beauty and the Beast, and Boys and the Hood. Television was also going through big changes. Nickelodeon launched 3 of its first original animated shows, Rugrats, Doug, and The Ren and Stimpy Show, which helped define 1990s animation. Other popular shows debuted or gained popularity as well, including Home Improvement, Step by Step, and Dinosaurs, while the long-running drama Dallas aired its series finale. The music scene also experienced a major shift. Bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and Stone Temple Pilots helped launch the grunge movement that would dominate rock music throughout the decade. Meanwhile, Metallica released their legendary self-titled album Metallica, often known as the Black Album. Michael Jackson released his 8th studio album Dangerous, and Guns N' Roses dropped their ambitious double release, Use Your Illusion I and Use Your Illusion 2. In sports, Magic Johnson shocked the world when he announced he had tested positive for HIV, forcing him to retire from the NBA. Meanwhile, Michael Jordan led the Chicago Bulls to their first NBA championship after defeating the Los Angeles Lakers 4-1, beginning the Bulls' legendary dynasty of the 1990s. In football, the New York Giants defeated the Buffalo Bills in Super Bowl 25 in one of the most dramatic endings in Super Bowl history. While wars around the world were coming to an end, a brand new battle was just beginning, one that would be fought not on the battlefield, but in the living rooms of millions of gamers. In 1991, Nintendo released its powerful 16-bit console, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, in North America. But Sega was not backing down. Sega had already launched the Sega Genesis and introduced a brand new mascot to compete with Mario, a fast blue hedgehog named Sonic the Hedgehog. That same year also saw the rise of one of the most iconic fighting games ever released in arcades, Street Fighter II, a game that would redefine competitive fighting games for years to come. So let's take a look back at the year in gaming, 1991, the year the console wars truly began. 1. The Console Wars, Nintendo vs. Sega. Through the mid to late 1980s, Nintendo dominated the home video game market with the hugely successful Nintendo Entertainment System, also known as the NES. The system revived the gaming industry after the crash of the early 1980s and made Nintendo the undisputed leader in home consoles. However, rival company Sega was preparing to challenge Nintendo's dominance. In 1989, Sega released one of the most powerful home consoles of the time, the Sega Genesis, bringing 16-bit gaming to North America. 2 years later, in 1991, Nintendo responded by launching its own 16-bit system in North America, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES. This moment marked the true beginning of the console wars. For the first time, 2 gaming giants were competing head-to-head with powerful 16-bit systems, each offering different strengths, games, and marketing strategies. The console wars of today in 2026 often play out on social media platforms like X and other online communities, and they can sometimes become toxic. But back in 1991, things were very different. There was no social media, just gamers debating with their friends at school, in arcades, or in gaming magazines about which console was better. Was it Nintendo with its strong lineup of exclusive games and colorful worlds? Or Sega with its faster, edgier style and arcade-like experiences? Those debates would define gaming throughout the early 1990s, and it all began in 1991, when the rivalry between Nintendo and Sega officially became the legendary console war. 2. Nintendo releases the Super NES in North America. In 1990, Nintendo launched its first 16-bit console in Japan, the Super Famicom. The system was designed to compete directly with Sega's Sega Mega Drive, which had already started gaining momentum in Japan. A year later, on August 23, 1991, Nintendo finally brought the system to North America as the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, also known as the Super NES, or SNES. For Nintendo fans, the wait was worth it. Gamers were excited to experience Nintendo's new generation of 16-bit gaming. The Super NES was powered by the Rico 5A22 CPU, a derivative of the WDC65C816 microprocessor, which allowed developers to create more detailed graphics, smoother gameplay, and larger worlds than what was possible on 8-bit systems like the Nintendo Entertainment System. The console also featured an advanced sound chip that produced richer audio and clearer music, giving many SNES games some of the most memorable soundtracks of the era. However, the system did come with a higher price tag. When the Super NES launched in North America, it retailed for $199.99, which was nearly $200, a fairly expensive price for a video game console in 1991. But for many gamers, the cost didn't matter. Demand was strong, and people were eager to get their hands on Nintendo's newest console. The Super NES would go on to become one of the most successful consoles of its generation, eventually becoming Nintendo's second best-selling console of the era, behind the legendary Nintendo Entertainment System. 3. Sega introduces Sonic the Hedgehog and drops the price of the Genesis. While Nintendo was launching the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, rival company Sega was not backing down from the fight. Sega knew that if they wanted to compete with Nintendo, they needed something just as recognizable as Mario. Before 1991, Sega's mascot had been Alex Kidd, but the character never quite reached the same level of popularity as Nintendo's famous plumber. So Sega decided to create a brand new mascot, one that would represent speed, attitude, and the power of their console. In 1991, Sega introduced Sonic the Hedgehog, a fast blue hedgehog who quickly became the face of the company. His debut game, Sonic the Hedgehog, showed off the speed and power of the Sega Genesis, with fast-paced gameplay and colorful levels that felt very different from Nintendo's style of platforming. But Sega didn't stop there. To compete directly with the newly released Super NES, Sega also made a bold move. They dropped the price of the Genesis from $199 to $149.99, making it significantly cheaper than Nintendo's console. Even more importantly, Sega began packing Sonic the Hedgehog in with the Genesis, turning the game into the system's killer app. This strategy helped Sega gain momentum in the market. Some retailers had previously been hesitant to sell Sega systems, but the popularity of Sonic and the lower price point helped bring the Genesis into more stores and more homes. Sega also positioned itself differently from Nintendo. While Nintendo focused heavily on families and younger kids, Sega marketed the Genesis toward teenagers and older gamers, giving the brand a more rebellious and edgy image. These moves helped spark the true beginning of the Nintendo versus Sega console wars, and they marked the rise of the Sega Genesis as a serious competitor in the gaming industry. 4. Street Fighter II dominates the arcades. While Nintendo and Sega were battling in the home console market, the arcade scene in 1991 was booming. One game in particular was bringing huge crowds into arcades across the world, Street Fighter II. The original Street Fighter had been released 4 years earlier in 1987, but it only featured a small number of fighters and never reached massive popularity. When Capcom released Street Fighter II in 1991, the series was completely transformed. The game introduced a roster of colorful and unique characters such as Ryu, Ken Masters, Guile, and Chun-Li. Chun-Li was especially groundbreaking. She became one of the first major playable female fighters in a fighting game, and unlike many female characters in games at the time, she wasn't portrayed as a princess or a damsel in distress. Instead, she was a powerful martial artist and one of the strongest characters in the game. Street Fighter II quickly became the top arcade game of 1991, and millions of gamers lined up at arcades to challenge each other. For many players, it created unforgettable memories, spending hours at local arcades, competing against friends and strangers, and even entering small weekend tournaments to win prizes. The game helped launch the fighting game boom of the early 1990s, paving the way for many other fighting games to follow. And while Street Fighter II dominated arcades, another fighting game would arrive the following year with a much darker and more violent style, one that would challenge Street Fighter's dominance. We'll talk about that game in the next video. But for now, Street Fighter II would go on to become one of the most iconic and influential fighting games in gaming history. 5. Super Mario World finally hits North America. A year earlier, Nintendo released Super Mario Bros. 3 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and it quickly became the best-selling game of 1990. But Nintendo wasn't done yet. In 1991, Mario made his first major appearance in the 16-bit era with Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in North America. The game represented a huge graphical leap from the NES era. With the power of the Super NES, the game featured brighter colors, smoother animations, improved sound, and much larger worlds than what players had seen in previous Mario games. The story begins with Mario, Luigi, and Princess Peach taking a relaxing vacation in a new location called Dinosaur Land. But their vacation quickly turns into another adventure when Bowser kidnaps Princess Peach once again. It's up to Mario and Luigi to travel across Dinosaur Land and rescue her. Along the way, players are introduced to a brand new character who would become one of the most beloved figures in the Mario series, Yoshi. Yoshi allows Mario to ride on his back and adds new gameplay mechanics. He can eat enemies and objects, giving players new strategies and abilities while exploring the game's levels. Super Mario World also introduced new music, new environments, hidden exits, and secret pathways, giving the game a deeper level of exploration than previous Mario titles. With its advanced graphics, creative level design, and the introduction of Yoshi, Super Mario World proved that the move to 16-bit gaming had truly arrived, and once again showed that Mario remained the king of Nintendo. 6. Super Castlevania IV. As the Super Nintendo Entertainment System arrived, one of Konami's most famous franchises also made the jump into the 16-bit era, Castlevania. In 1991, Konami released Super Castlevania IV, the first Castlevania game developed for Nintendo's new 16-bit console. Compared to the earlier Castlevania titles on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the game featured a huge leap in graphics, animation, and gameplay. The environments were more detailed, the character movements were smoother, and the music and sound design were richer thanks to the Super NES hardware. The story takes place in the year 1691 in the dark region of Transylvania. Players control the legendary vampire hunter Simon Belmont, whose mission is to defeat the evil vampire lord Dracula once again. The game quickly became one of the standout titles for the Super NES in its early years and was considered one of the best third-party games available for the system in 1991. Interestingly, Super Castlevania IV was not a launch title for the Super NES in North America. It was released about 3 months after the console's debut, but that didn't slow down its popularity. Nintendo fans were eager to experience a new Castlevania adventure on the powerful 16-bit system. With its improved gameplay, atmospheric music, and darker tone, Super Castlevania IV helped show what the Super NES could do for classic franchises, and it remains one of the most beloved entries in the Castlevania series. 8. Final Fantasy enters the 16-bit era. Another major milestone in gaming in 1991 was the arrival of one of the most important JRPG series of all time on 16-bit hardware. That series was Final Fantasy. In 1991, Square released Final Fantasy IV for the Super Famicom in Japan, marking the series' first appearance on a 16-bit console. The jump from 8-bit to 16-bit technology allowed the game to feature much improved graphics, larger environments, and more detailed storytelling than previous entries in the series. But the biggest innovation came from its gameplay system. Final Fantasy IV introduced the active time battle system, a combat mechanic that used timers to determine when characters could attack. Instead of waiting for turns in a traditional menu-based system, both heroes and enemies could act whenever their timer filled up, even while the player was navigating menus. This made battles feel faster, more strategic, and more intense. The game became a major success in Japan, becoming one of the top-selling games of 1991. It also helped expand interest in Japanese role-playing games outside Japan, as more players in North America began discovering the Final Fantasy series. With its storytelling, music, and innovative battle system, Final Fantasy IV helped define what a 16-bit RPG could be, and it played a major role in establishing Final Fantasy as one of the most iconic franchises in gaming history. 9. Final Fight hits the Super NES. Before arriving on home consoles, Final Fight had already made a huge impact in arcades. Developed by Capcom, the game was first released in Japanese arcades in 1989 and later arrived in North America in 1990, quickly becoming one of the most popular beat-em-up games of its time. With the launch of the Super Famicom in Japan and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in North America, Capcom brought the arcade hit to Nintendo's new 16-bit console. The Super NES version followed the same basic story as the arcade game. Players fight their way through the crime-filled streets of Metro City to rescue Jessica from a powerful criminal gang. However, the home console version came with one major change: In the arcade version, players could choose between 3 fighters: Mike Hager, Cody Travers, and Guy. But in the Super NES version released in North America, only 2 characters were playable: Mike Hager and Cody. Guy, the third fighter from the arcade version, was removed from the game. Even with that change, Final Fight still became one of the best-selling and most popular third-party titles on the Super NES in 1991. The game was exciting to play solo, but it became even more intense when playing cooperatively, as the difficulty increased in the later stages. Final Fight helped demonstrate the power of Nintendo's new 16-bit console and proved that arcade-style action games could successfully make the jump to home systems. But while Final Fight was gaining popularity on the Super NES, Sega would soon introduce its own rival beat-em-up on the Sega Genesis, a game that would challenge Final Fight in the years ahead. 10. Streets of Rage. Sega's answer to Final Fight. While Nintendo had success with Final Fight on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, rival company Sega was preparing its own answer for the beat-em-up genre on the Sega Genesis. In 1991, Sega released Streets of Rage, a side-scrolling beat-em-up that quickly became one of the most popular games on the Genesis. The story takes place in a crime-ridden city controlled by a powerful crime syndicate. 3 former police officers, Axel Stone, Blaze Fielding, and Adam Hunter, decide to take the law into their own hands and fight back against the criminal organization threatening their city. Just like Final Fight, players would battle waves of enemies across city streets, bars, and industrial areas, facing powerful bosses at the end of each stage. One of the things that made Streets of Rage stand out was its music and atmosphere. The soundtrack, composed by Yuzo Koshiro, gave the game a unique electronic and club-style sound that helped define the mood of the gritty city setting. The game also featured 2-player cooperative gameplay, allowing friends to team up and fight through the city together, which made it even more fun and competitive. Streets of Rage quickly became one of the standout titles on the Sega Genesis and helped strengthen Sega's growing library of games during the console wars. And just like Final Fight on the Super NES, Streets of Rage proved that the beat-em-up genre was one of the most popular styles of games in the early 1990s. The rivalry between Nintendo and Sega wasn't just about consoles, it was also about which system had the better games. 11. Battletoads keeps the NES alive. While gamers were excited about Super Nintendo Entertainment System and its 16-bit library, Nintendo's 8-bit powerhouse, the Nintendo Entertainment System, was far from forgotten. Even in 1991, the NES continued to receive strong releases that kept fans engaged. One of the standout titles that year was Battletoads. Some gamers saw similarities to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but Battletoads had its own unique twist. Instead of human heroes mutated into turtles, the characters were anthropomorphic toads with attitude. In the game, players controlled 2 of the Battletoads, Rash and Zitz, on a mission to defeat the evil Dark Queen and rescue their kidnapped friends, Pimple, the 3rd member of the Battletoads, and Princess Angelica. Battletoads was a classic beat-em-up on the NES, known for its fast-paced action, tricky platforming, and cooperative gameplay. It demonstrated that even as the 16-bit era was beginning, the NES still had life left and could deliver challenging and entertaining games. Many gamers in 1991 owned both consoles, a Super NES for cutting-edge 16-bit games and an NES to keep enjoying classics like Battletoads. This overlap showed how Nintendo successfully managed 2 generations of consoles simultaneously, keeping both new and old fans engaged. Even as the Super NES stole the spotlight, the NES proved it wasn't going anywhere just yet. 12. Joe Montana 2. Sports Talk Football. While 1991 was shaping up as a historic year for home consoles, it was also an important year for football video games. In the NFL, the New York Giants won a dramatic Super Bowl 25 against the Buffalo Bills. Meanwhile, one of the league's biggest stars, Joe Montana, missed the 1991 season due to injury, leaving the NFL wide open that year. At the same time, football video games were becoming increasingly popular. John Madden Football had already established itself as the top football game, with releases on both the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Sega decided to challenge Madden with its own football franchise. Their first attempt, simply titled Joe Montana Football, wasn't very well received. But Sega came back stronger with Joe Montana 2, Sports Talk Football, a true innovation for the genre. For the first time, a football video game offered real-time play-by-play commentary while you played. The game brought the feeling of a live broadcast into the living room, allowing players to hear the announcer describe the action as it happened, a feature that was groundbreaking for 1991 and far ahead of its time. Joe Montana 2. Sports Talk Football quickly became the top-selling football game of the year and marked the beginning of Sega's push to compete with EA Sports on the Sega Genesis. It set the stage for a rivalry in sports gaming that would last for years. And while Joe Montana 2 was a huge step forward, Sega's next football title would go even bigger, further advancing commentary, gameplay, and realism in sports video games. 13. Metroid 2. Return of Samus hits the Game Boy. In 1991, the Nintendo Game Boy was still Nintendo's top handheld system, letting gamers take their favorite titles on the go. That year, one of Nintendo's most iconic franchises made its Game Boy debut, Metroid 2. Return of Samus. In the game, players control the legendary bounty hunter Samus Aran on a mission to eradicate the Metroids from their home planet, SR-388, before the sinister space pirates can capture them. Players must hunt and exterminate the Metroids in order to progress through the game, exploring the alien world with strategy, skill, and exploration. This was the first time the Metroid series appeared on a handheld system, and it quickly became the top-selling Game Boy title of 1991. Metroid 2 proved that the Game Boy wasn't just a platform for smaller or simpler games. It could host major franchises and deliver deep, challenging, and engaging experiences, cementing its status as Nintendo's dominant handheld. 14. The beginning of developer Bungie. 1991 wasn't just important for games. It was also the year that one of the most influential developers in gaming history was born, Bungie. The studio was founded in Bellevue, Washington, and initially focused on developing games for Apple Macintosh and PC systems. Their early work included the innovative first-person shooter series Marathon, which helped establish their reputation in the gaming community. While Bungie started small, their story took a major turn when they were later acquired by Microsoft in 2000. This partnership would lead to the creation of one of the most iconic gaming franchises of all time, Halo, which launched on the Xbox in 2001 and became a defining series for the platform. Over the years, Bungie has grown into one of the most respected and influential developers in the industry, creating beloved franchises such as Halo, Destiny, and maintaining a legacy that traces back to their humble beginnings in 1991. The studio's founding marked the start of a developer that would change the landscape of gaming for decades. 15. The Sony-Nintendo partnership falls through. 1991 wasn't just about games. It was also a pivotal year for the future of consoles. Originally, Sony and Nintendo were collaborating on a brand new CD-based system that would expand the capabilities of the Super NES. However, the partnership fell apart, leaving Nintendo to continue with cartridges while Sony was left with a prototype and an idea. This setback didn't slow Sony down. Instead, it paved the way for the company to develop its own console, which would eventually become the PlayStation, launching in 1994 and reshaping the gaming industry forever. The collapse of the Sony-Nintendo deal in 1991 was more than a failed partnership. It was the beginning of a new player in the console wars, one that would soon challenge both Nintendo and Sega in a way no one expected. 1991 was more than just another year in gaming. It was the beginning of a new era. The console wars between Nintendo and Sega officially heated up, with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Genesis battling for the hearts of gamers around the world. Nintendo wowed players with Super Mario World and Super Castlevania IV, while Sega answered with Sonic the Hedgehog and Streets of Rage, carving out a more rebellious and edgy image for their system. Arcades continued to thrive, with Street Fighter II revolutionizing competitive fighting games, introducing iconic characters like Ryu, Ken, Guile, and Chun-Li, the first strong female fighter in a major franchise. Meanwhile, Final Fantasy IV made its 16-bit debut, bringing deep storytelling and the innovative active time battle system to the genre. Even the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System still had life, with games like Battletoads proving that the NES could still deliver challenging and fun experiences alongside its 16-bit successor. Handheld gamers weren't left out either. Metroid 2. Return of Samus brought one of Nintendo's most iconic franchises to the Game Boy, proving the system was still king of portable gaming. 1991 also saw the rise of new developers and innovation. Bungie was founded in Bellevue, Washington, setting the stage for future classics like Halo and Destiny. Sports games were also evolving. Joe Montana 2, Sports Talk Football introduced real-time play-by-play commentary, a revolutionary feature that would influence sports games for decades. And behind the scenes, the Sony-Nintendo partnership fell through, paving the way for Sony to eventually launch the PlayStation, a console that would reshape the entire industry and set the stage for the next generation of gaming. All of these moments together show that 1991 was a turning point, a year where technology, creativity, and competition converged to change the way we play games forever. From iconic franchises to groundbreaking gameplay, it was a year that set the tone for the 16-bit era and the modern gaming landscape we know today. So whether you were lining up at the arcade for Street Fighter II, exploring Dinosaur Land with Mario, racing through Sonic's loops, or strategizing in Final Fantasy IV, 1991 was a year where gaming truly leveled up. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because we'll continue exploring the most pivotal years in gaming history, one legendary year at a time.